Our next guest has been at the helm of Time since 2019. But at the end of the year, Keith Grossman will be leaving his post at the legacy publisher to dive deeper into crypto, taking on a new role as the president of enterprise at crypto exchange MoonPay. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you so much for having me.
So many would argue this isn't the best time to get into crypto. You not only sort of have been all in at Time with NFTs, now you're taking this big leap as well. So why now? And why with MoonPay?
So, why now? I would start with, I'm a contrarian by nature, right? And so I would say, since everyone likes to joke that I have a Churchill quote for everything, I would say, difficulties mastered or opportunities won. Right now is probably the time that is best for building. At Time, we've been heads down for a good part of 2 years. Through thick and thin, we've seen timepieces grow to over 60,000 strong. We've seen continued success. And if you look at the moment, while the prices of crypto might be down, there's a lot of exciting things happening when it comes to, the technology behind the scenes. In the past 3 months alone, you've seen Starbucks enter into the space. You've seen Nike enter into the space. You've seen Universal Studios enter into the space. You've seen Flamengo enter into the space, many of which have been done with MoonPay. And, part of the reason why I saw MoonPay as the natural evolution is no matter how hard we tried at Time, and, I think that we've done a remarkable job. The reality is we've only laid about 35,000 contracts, right, through what we've dropped. And, my goal is how do we continue to onboard this Web3 evolution? And, MoonPay, in my opinion, solves a lot of the problems to bring on the next billion people into the ecosystem.
So, Keith, welcome back. So what's going to happen here with Time? Of course, I'm going to be a contrarian here and ask you questions about legacy media. So what exactly is going to happen with Time, and what's the path going forward for that publication? Obviously, it's been around forever, but as you leave it, where is it going?
Sure. So it's important to remember that first, Time has incredible ownership, right? Between Mark and Lynn Benioff, they have given us the platform and the runway to think big. The only reason Time is in Web3 is because of their approval, right? And their permission to enter into the space. And I think it's really important to clarify, I started to transition my role as president last year so I could focus exclusively on Web3. And Time recently announced a new CEO, Jessica Sibley, and she's going to be incredible in terms of leading it into its next stage. But the reality is that as I moved into the Web3 space, I hired out a team to operationalize our Web3 endeavors, and we've been scaling this out for the past year already. When I hired our VP of operations of Web3, and this was what I said to the team last night, is I thanked them specifically before this announcement went out, was, look, I need you to create a structure that can support my ability to also be able to grow in addition to everyone else's ability to grow. And so, I think Time is going to be, in a strong position. I think that in the beginning, it required someone like me to push this evolution forward into Web3. But, just as a rocket ship requires, one aspect of it to enter into orbit, I think it's at the next stage where it's been operationalized enough to sustain and be successful on its own.
Keith, first of all, I was going to compliment you with a Churchill quote, because I know Lawrence would have appreciated that, him being Churchillian in his responses as well. But
I can Churchill quote everything, just so you know.
All right, well, you guys can do that offline. So listen, there's this moment in Time has been obviously such a moment of reflection, and one of the themes that is emerging is that we really need the entire industry to get away from sort of speculation for speculation's sake, that number go up is the reason why you should buy something or own it, right? Rather than the fact that there are underlying use cases in real utility in this technology. I think what's interesting about Time, but also a number of the brands that you mentioned as well, is that there's this idea that Web3 NFTs presents an emerging new business model, that it's not just, raising a bunch of money on a highly priced JPEG, but actually there's an entire new model for how media and brands and so forth interact with their customers. How do you see this playing out then? Like, in the light of, and how do you juxtapose those two stories, right? One of speculation being this almost defining experience, and this new business model approach to NFTs and Web3.
Sure. So I think it's important that people separate two aspects of this ecosystem. The first is collectibles and art, right? And I think that when it comes to collectibles and art, I think it will always exist, and that will always have value, and that value will be defined by the marketplace. I think the second aspect of it is what does the technology enable that you can't do without the technology? And I think that what's really important is people realize it enables the consumer with choice in two areas. Do you want to be an online renter, which is what you have in Web 2, or do you want to be an online owner? Second, do you want to provide your personal information, or do you want to hold on to your personal information? In Web 2, you have none of those choices. In Web 3, you're presented with those choices. When you're presented with the choice of becoming an online owner, what you all of a sudden find is that you can have a different relationship with a brand and consumer. And I think that what you saw with timepieces was, if you own a timepiece, you can connect it to time.com and it removes the paywall. And, that's just the most simplistic area for you to think of how the technology can use. But the reality is that the technology is really incredible when you start to think about it, not in terms of art and collectibles, but in terms of membership, rewards, loyalty programs, subscriptions. And when you start to realize that most people are not going to even understand or think that they're interacting with this ecosystem at all. And what I liked about MoonPay was all of the tools that they had at their disposal enable me and the team to ultimately go into the marketplace and remove what I think are the biggest obstacles, which is one, the consumer experience on the front end is so complex. I always joke about the idea of my mom trying to get onto Twitter. And she said to me, Keith, put me on the Twitter, which is my impersonation of my mom. And I said, no, it's Twitter, but I can get you on in 2 seconds. And there she was. There's zero scenario today, zero, not 1%, not 0.01%. There's zero scenario today where my mom is going to ask me to get her a Coinbase account, to transfer fiat to her Coinbase account. By the way, she's never going to even use the word fiat, right? These are inside baseball terms. There's never going to be a scenario where she then says, convert it to Ethereum or to another coin, let it sit for 7 days, get me a MetaMask account, now transfer it, right? And so what I love about First MoonPay is it enables you to onboard through fiat on-ramps very easily, right? So that way the consumer does not even have to think about it. The second is that right now we're in a moment in time where the technology is leading and the experience is following, right? And this is just totally normal in any technological evolution, right? And so you have to remember that my background is Wired and Ars Technica and Bloomberg. And when you started, like with the PC revolution, you started to see people talk about the chipsets, 486s, Pentiums, 14.4 BPM modems. That's where we are today, right? Think about it. We're not going to use terms like NFTs, or we're not even going to talk about blockchains in 2 years, 3 years. And if you don't believe me, think about the most famous ad campaign of all time, Intel Inside, right? Within the computing set. Like, right now, if I was to ask either of you or anyone in the audience who's watching, what percentage of your devices have Intel chips in them, your answer would be, I don't know, I don't care, I just want it to work, right? And ultimately, what shifted that was Steve Jobs holding up the iPod and saying, 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then all of a sudden, we went from an industry where we were talking about specs to an industry where we were talking about experiences. And I think that when you look at what MoonPay did with Universal, right? When you look at what Time did with timepieces, right? People started to talk about the experience that they were having, not the specs. And I think that when you also look at companies like Starbucks or Nike entering into the space, I think that that's a really good bellwether that while the market might be depressed, that like these are companies that have been leading previous revolutions time and time again.
So Keith, you talk about changing the way in which people, a few years from now, they won't use the term NFT, et cetera. Over the past few years, we've seen a complete change in the way people consume content from even if you were to start from pre-internet to early stages of internet to the social media revolution because of your phone. Walk me through the next 5 years. What happens with content? How does the likes of MoonPay change the way content is produced and ultimately consumed?
Sure. So I love this question so much, and thank you for asking it. I'm a firm believer that great content transcends platforms or experiences, right? So if you take, let's say, some of the best stories of all time. I'll take one, which is the Iliad, right? The Iliad started and it was memorized, and it was spoken, and it was handed down and memorized from person to person. And then all of a sudden, the written press came around, and the Iliad was written down. And hundreds of years later, computers came around, and the Iliad was digitized. And my daughter, has an Alexa. If she said to the Alexa, read me the Iliad would read her the Iliad, right? And nothing changed with the Iliad. All that changed was the way in which consumers are able to engage with the Iliad. I think that when it comes to Web3 and what it's going to do, I think a lot of the case studies that will emerge in terms of how content, is engaged with it are not yet known. But what I do know is that you have an entire media ecosystem that is going to have to confront GDPR and CCPA and the disappearance of third-party cookies. And what this ecosystem provides is an opportunity for the consumer to control their personal information. And I think that when that happens, the relationship between content brands and any brand in general and the consumer shifts, because right now, the consumer's information is extractive in Web 2. But in Web 3, the brand has to actually say to the consumer, I'm willing to give you something that you value in return for your information. And the example I would give as it relates to time was last year at the Time Person of the Year event, we said, if you enter into this raffle, we will allow 5 people within the timepiece community to attend the Time Person of the Year with Elon Musk at the time, who was the Time Person of the Year last year. And thousands of members provided us with their information. And outside of Time, if you look at Twitter and sort of Twitter Blue, pre-Elon, right, when they provided it, their ability to provide that hexagonal sort of verification is proof point that consumers are willing to give their information if they see value in return. And I think that the future of content is going to be that type of relationship more so than anything else. And great content will always be great content.